Edward Hartwell stood in the entrance hall of Briarfield Manor, travel dust still clinging to his coat, his eyes fixed on the wilted flowers scattered across the breakfast table. Yesterday's wedding blooms, already fading. The front door remained open behind him, morning light cutting through the stillness, and he heard the whisper of silk on the staircase before he saw her. Lady Alderton descended with the measured grace of a woman who had anticipated this moment, her expression settling into something that might have been satisfaction or resignation. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom and met his gaze without flinching. "Lord Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying the calm precision of a hostess greeting an expected guest. "You are a day late." Edward's hands tightened at his sides. He looked past her, toward the doorway that led to the morning room, and his breath caught when Rosalind appeared. She wore a simple morning dress of pale blue muslin, her dark hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, and on her left hand, catching the light from the window, was a ring that had not been there 10 years ago, a ring that was 1 day old. The color drained from her face when she saw him, her fingers gripping the doorframe as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "I was told you didn't want me," Edward said, his voice rough from the long ride and the weight of 10 years carried in silence. Rosalind's lips parted, but no sound came. She stared at him as though he were a ghost, as though the sight of him standing in her stepmother's entrance hall defied every truth she had built her life upon. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was told you never came." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and irrefutable. Lady Alderton remained on the staircase, positioned precisely between them, her hands folded at her waist. She said nothing. Her silence was deliberate, controlled, and in the stillness that followed, Edward understood that she had been waiting for this confrontation. She had known, perhaps from the moment his horse appeared on the drive, that the lie she had told 10 years ago would finally be spoken aloud. Rosalind took a single step forward, her hand falling from the doorframe. "You never wrote," she said, and now her voice carried the edge of accusation. "You vanished. I waited for weeks, and you sent nothing." "I was shown a letter," Edward said, his gaze moving between Rosalind and the woman on the stairs. "A letter in your handwriting. It said you did not wish to see me again. It asked me not to return." Her breath hitched. "I wrote no such letter." He nodded slowly. "I have seen it. Your stepmother showed it to me. It was your hand, Rosalind. I would know it anywhere." Lady Alderton descended the final 3 steps, her movements unhurried. "This is hardly the time for such a discussion," she said, her tone pleasant, almost conciliatory. "Lord Hartwell, you must understand that my stepdaughter is now Lady Somersby. She was married yesterday. Whatever misunderstanding occurred a decade ago, it is no longer—" "What letter?" Rosalind interrupted, her voice rising. She turned to her stepmother, her fingers curling into fists. "What letter did you show him?" Lady Alderton's expression did not change. "A letter you wrote, my dear. One in which you expressed your desire to decline a certain gentleman's suit. I presented it to Lord Hartwell when he arrived, unannounced, 10 years ago. He read it and left. That is all." "A letter declining a suit," Rosalind repeated slowly. Her eyes narrowed, and Edward saw the moment understanding began to dawn. "I wrote such a letter. I wrote it to Mr. Gresham, the curate you were attempting to force upon me. I refused him. I told him I had no interest in his attentions and asked him not to call again." Edward felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Gresham?" She met his gaze. "Yes. I wrote that letter to refuse a man I had never met, a man my stepmother was pressing me to accept. I did not write it to you." I would never have written such a thing to you." Lady Alderton's composure remained unshaken. "You were young," she said softly. "You did not know your own mind. I acted in your best interest, Rosalind. Lord Hartwell was—" "You lied." Rosalind's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You showed him a letter I wrote to another man and told him it was meant for him. You sent him away. I protected you," Lady Alderton replied, and for the first time a note of steel entered her voice. "Lord Hartwell was a second son with no prospects. You were a baronet's daughter. I ensured you would not throw yourself away on a man who could offer you nothing." "I was an earl within the year," Edward said quietly. "My brother died in a riding accident 8 months after I left Briarfield. I inherited the title, the estate, and a considerable fortune." "Did you know that, Lady Alderton?" She did not answer. Rosalind pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "You knew I loved him," she whispered. "You knew and you destroyed it." "I secured your future," Lady Alderton said, her voice hardening. "And you have done well, have you not? You are Lady Somersby now. Your husband is a baron with an estate in Kent and a house in London. You have security, position, and respect. What would you have had with Lord Hartwell 10 years ago? A second son with nothing but a commission and a borrowed horse." Edward took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. "You had no right." "I had every right," Lady Alderton replied, turning to face him fully. "I was her guardian. Her father entrusted me with her well-being, and I fulfilled that duty. You may rage at me now, Lord Hartwell, but the fact remains. My stepdaughter is married. She was married yesterday, in the chapel at Briarfield, before witnesses and in the eyes of God. Whatever you believe you came here to accomplish, you are too late." Rosalind swayed slightly, and Edward moved toward her instinctively, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Do not," she said, her voice cracking. "You are addressing another man's wife." The words struck him like a blow. He stopped where he was, his chest tightening, and watched as Rosalind turned and walked out of the entrance hall, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Lady Alderton remained where she was, her hands folded, her expression serene. "You should leave, Lord Hartwell," she said quietly. "There is nothing for you here." Edward looked at her for a long moment, taking in the calm certainty in her eyes, the utter lack of remorse. "This is not finished," he said. She turned and ascended the stairs. "It is. It was finished 10 years ago." Her silk skirts whispered against the polished wood. Edward stood alone in the entrance hall, surrounded by wilted flowers and the wreckage of a decade built on lies. Edward found Rosalind in the garden an hour later, standing at the iron gate that separated the formal grounds from the meadow beyond. She had not changed her dress, and the morning sun illuminated the pale muslin, making her appear almost translucent. She did not turn when he approached, but he saw her shoulders stiffen, and he knew she was aware of his presence. "I should not have believed the letter," he said, stopping a few paces behind her. "I should have come to your window. I should have demanded to see you. I did none of those things, and that failure is mine to carry." Rosalind's hands tightened on the iron bars. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her voice low and raw. "Why did you read a piece of paper and simply leave? Did you know me so little that you believed I could write such a thing?" "I believed it because I thought I was not enough for you," Edward said. "You were the daughter of a baronet, raised in a manner, educated and accomplished. I was a second son with a commission I had not yet taken up. I had nothing to offer you but myself. And when your stepmother showed me that letter, I thought—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I thought you had realized what I already feared, that you deserve better." Rosalind turned then, her eyes blazing. "So you left. You did not ask me. You did not question it. You simply accepted that I had dismissed you and walked away." He held her gaze. "Yes. And in the 10 years since, did you never think to return? To ask why? To demand an explanation?" Edward met her gaze, unflinching. "I married Lady Catherine Holt 8 months later. It was a match arranged by my family, and I accepted it because I believed you had refused me. Catherine was kind, and I tried to be a good husband to her. She died 14 months ago, and it was only after her death that my solicitor, Mr. Pembroke, began reviewing certain financial arrangements connected to our marriage. He found discrepancies, he investigated, and he uncovered the truth." Rosalind's breath came faster now, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin muslin. "What truth?" "That your stepmother received a payment when I married Catherine. £400, transferred 6 months after the wedding. Pembroke traced the payment back to Catherine's family, and he found correspondence between Lady Alderton and Catherine's father. Your stepmother brokered the match. She removed me from your life and sold me to another family for profit." Rosalind closed her eyes, her knuckles white against the gate. "She sold you." "And then she sold you," Edward said quietly. "Pembroke discovered that your betrothal to Lord Somersby was formalized 6 months after Lady Alderton received confirmation that I had married. She waited until I was no longer available, and then she arranged a replacement." Rosalind opened her eyes, and when she looked at him, the fury in her gaze was no longer directed solely at Lady Alderton. "You should have come back," she said, her words unsteady. "You should have questioned the letter. You should have trusted what you knew about me instead of what she told you. You failed me, Edward. You left me here, and I waited. I waited for years, and you never came." He drew a slow breath. "I know, and I am sorry. But I am here now." "You are a day late," Rosalind said, echoing her stepmother's words. "I am married, Edward. I am legally bound to another man. Your apology does not undo that. Your presence here does not dissolve a marriage made before God and witnesses." Edward took a step closer, close enough that his shoulder blocked the wind that had begun to rise from the east. He did not touch her, but he stood near enough that she could feel his warmth, and he saw the way her hands trembled on the iron bars. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Rosalind shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not know." Rosalind sat alone in the Briarfield morning room, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the portrait of her mother that hung above the mantelpiece. The room was quiet, the fire burning low in the grate. And outside the window, the afternoon light had begun to fade into evening. She had not seen Edward since their conversation in the garden, and she had not spoken to her stepmother since the confrontation in the entrance hall. She felt suspended, caught between the life she had built over the past 10 years and the truth that had shattered it in a single morning. The letter had been real. She remembered writing it, remembered the careful phrasing she had used to refuse Mr. Gresham without giving offense. She had been 18, and Lady Alderton had been relentless in her insistence that Rosalind accept the curate's attentions. Rosalind had refused, and she had written the letter to make her refusal clear. She had never imagined that her stepmother would take that letter, present it to Edward, and use it to drive him away. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not a lie precisely, but a redirection. A truth twisted into a weapon. Lady Alderton had not forged a letter. She had simply changed its intended recipient. And Edward, believing the letter was meant for him, had left. Rosalind pressed her hands to her face, her breath hitching. She wanted to be angry with him, wanted to hold him accountable for believing a piece of paper over everything he had known about her. And she was angry. But beneath the anger was a deeper, more painful truth. She had married Lord Somersby yesterday. She had spoken vows before witnesses. She had accepted his ring and his name. And no matter what Edward had discovered, no matter what Lady Alderton had done, the marriage was lawful. She could not simply leave Thomas Somersby. He was a decent man, quiet and kind, who had proposed because Lady Alderton had arranged the match, and Rosalind, after 10 years of waiting, had accepted because waiting had become indistinguishable from disappearing. He had done nothing wrong. He did not deserve to be humiliated, to have his wife leave him the day after their wedding for a man who had arrived too late. The door opened, and Rosalind looked up to see her stepmother standing in the doorway. Lady Alderton's expression was calm, her posture composed, and she closed the door behind her before crossing the room to sit in the chair opposite Rosalind. "You must compose yourself," Lady Alderton said quietly. "Lord Somersby will return from his estate business this evening, and he must not find you like this." Rosalind stared at her. "How can you speak to me as though nothing has happened?" "Because nothing has happened," Lady Alderton replied. "Lord Hartwell arrived, made certain accusations, and you became distressed. That is all. You are still Lady Somersby. You are still my stepdaughter, and you will conduct yourself accordingly." "You lied to him," Rosalind said, her tone shaking. "You showed him a letter I wrote to another man, and told him it was meant for him. You sent him away. I protected you," Lady Alderton said, her tone sharpening. "Lord Hartwell had nothing to offer you. He was a second son with no prospects, and you were infatuated. I did what was necessary to secure your future." "You destroyed my future," Rosalind said, her palms pressed flat against her skirts. "You knew I loved him, and you took that from me." "I gave you security," Lady Alderton replied. "You are married to a baron, Rosalind. You have an estate, a household, and a position in society. What would you have had with Lord Hartwell 10 years ago? Nothing. You would have been the wife of a second son, struggling to maintain appearances on a soldier's pay. I saved you from that." Rosalind stood, her arms rigid at her sides. "You sold him," she said, her voice rising. "Edward told me about the payment. You brokered his marriage to Lady Catherine and received £400 for it. You profited from his departure." Lady Alderton's expression did not change. "I arranged a match that benefited all parties involved. Lord Hartwell's family desired a connection to the Holt estate, and Catherine's family desired a title. I facilitated the arrangement, and yes, I was compensated for my efforts. That is how such matters are conducted. Rosalind, you are not a child. You understand the way the world works." "And my marriage to Lord Somersby?" Rosalind demanded. "Was that another transaction?" Lady Alderton stood, her posture rigid. "Your marriage to Lord Somersby is the best match you could have hoped for. He is a decent man with a respectable estate, and he will provide for you. You should be grateful, not resentful." "I am not resentful," Rosalind said quietly. "I am grieving. I am grieving the life I might have had, the man I loved, and the decade you stole from me." Lady Alderton's eyes hardened. "You are being dramatic. Lord Hartwell is here now, and you are married. The past is irrelevant. What matters is your conduct going forward. If you are seen with him, if you allow him to speak to you privately, if you give anyone reason to question your loyalty to your husband, I will ensure that the consequences fall on you, not on me. Rosalind stared at her stepmother, seeing her clearly for the first time. You are afraid, she said slowly. You are afraid that the truth will come out, and that you will be held accountable. Lady Alderton's lips thinned. I am not afraid. I am practical, and you would do well to be practical as well. Lord Hartwell will leave, Rosalind. He will return to his estate, and you will remain here with your husband. That is the reality of your situation. Accept it. She turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind her. Rosalind sank back into her chair, her shoulders sagging, and stared at the portrait of her mother until the light faded completely, and the room was swallowed by darkness. Lord Thomas Somersby sat at the breakfast table in his London townhouse, a letter from his estate manager spread before him when Lady Alderton was announced. He looked up in surprise as she entered, her morning dress immaculate, her expression warm and pleasant. She accepted the chair he offered and declined tea, folding her hands in her lap with the ease of a woman accustomed to such visits. I apologize for calling so early, she said, her voice carrying a note of maternal concern. But I felt it necessary to speak with you privately, Lord Somersby, regarding a matter that has arisen at Briarfield. Somersby set down the letter, his attention now fully on his mother-in-law. Is Rosalind well? She is distressed, Lady Alderton said, her expression softening. And with good reason. Lord Hartwell arrived at Briarfield yesterday morning. He appeared unannounced, and he has been persistent in his attempts to speak with her. Somersby frowned. Lord Hartwell? I am not familiar with the name. He is an earl, Lady Alderton said, her tone carefully neutral. He and Rosalind were acquainted in their youth. He left Briarfield 10 years ago, and we had not heard from him since. His arrival the morning after your wedding is unfortunate, and it has caused talk among the staff. Somersby's frown deepened. What sort of talk? The sort one would expect, Lady Alderton said delicately. A widower arriving at your wife's childhood home the day after her wedding, seeking private conversations with her. You must see how that appears, Lord Somersby. Somersby leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. What are you suggesting, Lady Alderton? I am suggesting that you speak with your wife, Lady Alderton said, her voice gentle. She is young, and she may not fully understand the implications of receiving a gentleman in such circumstances. I have no doubt that her intentions are entirely proper, but appearances matter. You know this as well as I do. Somersby studied her for a long moment, his face giving nothing away. You are concerned about scandal. I am concerned about my stepdaughter's reputation, Lady Alderton replied. And yours, Lord Somersby. You are a man of standing, and your wife's conduct reflects upon you. I would not have troubled you with this matter if I did not believe it warranted your attention. Somersby nodded slowly. I will speak with Rosalind, he said. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Lady Alderton rose, her smile warm. I knew you would understand. You are a sensible man, Lord Somersby. Rosalind is fortunate to have you. She left the townhouse with the same grace with which she had arrived, and Somersby remained at the table, staring at the letter from his estate manager, without seeing it. Something in Lady Alderton's manner had unsettled him. Her concern had been expressed with perfect propriety, but beneath the pleasantries, he had sensed something harder, something calculated. She had been more concerned with reputation than with Rosalind's distress, and that struck him as odd. A mother, or a stepmother, should be concerned first with her daughter's well-being, not with appearances. He folded the letter and set it aside, his mind turning over the conversation. He would speak with Rosalind, as he had promised, but he would also ask his own questions. Edward found Rosalind in the garden again that afternoon, standing in the same place she had stood that morning, her hands gripping the iron gate. The wind had risen, carrying with it the scent of rain, and he approached slowly, giving her time to hear his footsteps and turn away if she wished. She did not turn away. She remained where she was, her gaze fixed on the meadow beyond the gate, and when he stopped beside her, near enough that he shielded her from the gusts, she did not move. "I spoke with Mr. Pembroke," Edward said quietly. "My solicitor. He is continuing to investigate the financial arrangements surrounding my marriage to Catherine. He believes there may be additional documents that clarify the full scope of Lady Alderton's involvement." Rosalind's grip on the gate tightened. What will that accomplish? "It will establish the truth," Edward said. "It will show that your stepmother orchestrated my departure and profited from it. And it may provide grounds for what?" Rosalind interrupted, her voice sharp. "For annulment. I am married, Edward. I spoke vows before God. I accepted Thomas Somersby's ring and his name. No document, no matter what it reveals, will dissolve that." He drew breath to respond. "Rosalind, do not speak to me of truth," she said, turning to face him. Her eyes were red, her cheeks pale, and the fury in her gaze was no longer directed solely at Lady Alderton. "You want to establish the truth now, after 10 years? Where was your desire for truth when you read that letter and left? Where was your need for clarity when you married Lady Catherine 8 months later?" Edward absorbed the blow without flinching. "I have no excuse," he said. "I failed you. I believed a lie and I did not return. That is my burden to carry." "And what am I to do with that?" Rosalind demanded. "Am I to forgive you because you have apologized? Am I to leave my husband because you have finally decided to question what you were told?" "I am not asking you to leave him," Edward said quietly. "I am asking you to let me fight for you, to let me uncover the full extent of what Lady Alderton did, and to give you the choice she took from you 10 years ago." Rosalind shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You cannot give me that choice, Edward. I am married. The choice is gone." Edward reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the iron bar, but he did not touch her. "Then tell me to leave," he said. "Tell me you do not want me here, and I will go." Rosalind stared at him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot tell you to leave, and I cannot ask you to stay. I do not know what I want, Edward. I do not know anything anymore." Edward's hand moved, slowly, until it rested on the iron bar beside hers. Not over it, not touching, just beside it. And after a long moment, Rosalind shifted her hand until their fingers overlapped, the warmth of his skin against hers, and neither of them spoke. Mr. Pembroke arrived at Briarfield 3 days later, carrying a leather case filled with documents. He met with Edward in the library, spreading the papers across the desk, and Edward listened as his solicitor explained what he had uncovered. The financial settlement connected to Edward's marriage to Catherine Holt was more complex than they had initially believed. The payment to Lady Alderton had been only one part of a larger arrangement, and Pembroke had found correspondence between Lady Alderton and Catherine's father that suggested the match had been brokered months before Edward had even left Briarfield. She planned it, Edward said, staring at the documents. She planned to remove me from Rosalind's life and sell me to the Holt family before I ever arrived at Briarfield. It appears so, my lord, Pembroke said. The correspondence indicates that Lady Alderton approached Mr. Holt shortly after you began courting Miss Farrow. She described you as a second son with no prospects, but significant charm. And she suggested that you might be persuaded to accept an advantageous match if you believed Miss Farrow was unavailable. Edward's hands clenched on the edge of the desk. And the letter? The letter was the mechanism, Pembroke said. Lady Alderton intercepted Miss Farrow's refusal to Mr. Gresham and presented it to you as her refusal of your suit. You left, and within weeks, Lady Alderton contacted Mr. Holt to inform him that you were now available. The match was arranged quickly, and the settlement was paid 6 months after the wedding. Edward looked up, his jaw tight. Can this be proven? The correspondence exists, Pembroke said, and I have located the settlement documents. However, proving that Lady Alderton acted with malicious intent may be more difficult. She can claim that she was acting in Miss Farrow's best interest, and that the financial arrangement with the Holt family was a separate matter. Edward stood, pacing to the window. What about Rosalind's marriage to Lord Somersby? Can we establish that it was arranged under false pretenses? Pembroke hesitated. That would require Lord Somersby's cooperation, my lord. If he is willing to testify that Lady Alderton brokered the match without his full knowledge of the circumstances, it may be possible to petition for an annulment. But if Lord Somersby refuses, or if he believes the marriage to be valid and binding, there is little we can do. Edward turned back to his solicitor. Then we must speak with Lord Somersby. Lord Somersby returned to Briarfield that evening, and he found Rosalind in the morning room, sitting by the fire with a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded, and he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held the book as though it were a lifeline. Rosalind, he said quietly, crossing the room to sit in the chair opposite her. We need to speak. She set the book aside, her hands folding in her lap. About what? About Lord Hartwell, Somersby said. Your stepmother came to see me in London. She told me he has been here, that he has been seeking private conversations with you. She suggested that his presence has caused talk among the staff. Rosalind's face grew stern. My stepmother is concerned about appearances. Are the appearances false? Somersby asked, his tone gentle but firm. Rosalind met his gaze. Lord Hartwell and I were acquainted 10 years ago. He left Briarfield under circumstances that I did not fully understand until he returned. He came here to tell me the truth about why he left, and that truth has complicated matters. Somersby leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. What truth? Rosalind hesitated, and then, slowly, she told him. She told him about the letter, about Lady Alderton's deception, about the financial settlement connected to Edward's marriage. She spoke quietly, her voice steady. And when she finished, Somersby sat back in his chair, his features carefully neutral. Your stepmother lied to him, he said finally. She showed him a letter you wrote to another man and told him it was meant for him. She nodded. Yes. And she profited from his subsequent marriage. Another nod. Yes. Somersby was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. And our marriage? He asked. Was that arranged in the same manner? Rosalind's breath hitched. I do not know, she said. Edward's solicitor is investigating, but I do not know the full extent of Lady Alderton's involvement in our betrothal. Somersby nodded slowly, his mouth a thin line. I see. He stood, and Rosalind rose with him, her body tense. Thomas, she said, her words catching. I am sorry. I did not know. You have nothing to apologize for, Somersby said, his tone firm. If what you have told me is true, then you are the victim of a terrible deception, and I will not stand by and allow it to continue. He left the morning room, and Rosalind sank back into her chair, her hands pressed to her face as the fire burned low in the grate. Lady Alderton found Lord Somersby in his study the following afternoon. She entered without knocking, her expression pleasant, and she closed the door behind her before crossing the room to stand before his desk. Somersby looked up from the letter he had been writing, his expression cool, and he set down his pen. Lady Alderton, he said, I was not expecting you. I came to speak with you privately, she said, her tone warm. I understand that you have been speaking with Rosalind about Lord Hartwell's visit. He inclined his head. I have. Then you understand the delicacy of the situation. Lady Alderton continued. Lord Hartwell is a widower with a certain reputation, and his presence here has caused concern. I believe it would be best if you spoke with him directly and asked him to leave. Somersby leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. Why would I do that? Lady Alderton's smile faltered slightly. Because his presence is a threat to your wife's reputation. Surely you see that. What I see, Somersby said quietly, is that you are very concerned about Lord Hartwell's presence. More concerned, I think, than you should be if his visit were merely a matter of propriety. Lady Alderton's demeanor shifted, growing colder. I am concerned about my stepdaughter's well-being. Are you? Somersby asked. Or are you concerned about what Lord Hartwell might reveal? Lady Alderton's hands tightened at her sides. I do not know what you mean. I think you do, Somersby said. He opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a folded letter. I have been making inquiries of my own, Lady Alderton. I spoke with my solicitor, and I asked him to review the circumstances surrounding my betrothal to your stepdaughter. He found several interesting documents. Would you like to see them? Lady Alderton's composure flickered, and for the first time, Somersby saw something like fear in her eyes. That is not necessary, she said. I think it is, Somersby replied. He unfolded the letter and placed it on the desk between them. This is a letter from you to my mother, written 18 months ago. In it, you describe Rosalind as a quiet, accomplished young woman who would make an excellent wife for a man of standing. You suggest that I might find her suitable, and you offer to facilitate an introduction. Lady Alderton said nothing. My mother forwarded your letter to me, Somersby continued, and I accepted the introduction because I trusted her judgment. I met Rosalind, and I found her to be everything you described. But what you did not tell me, Lady Alderton, is that you had been brokering matches for years, that you had profited from arranging marriages for other families, and that you had a particular interest in ensuring that Rosalind married someone you could control. Lady Alderton's voice was low and cold. You are mistaken. He met her eyes. Am I? Then perhaps you can explain why you visited me in London and threatened to accuse my wife of adultery if I did not force Lord Hartwell to leave. Lady Alderton's breath caught. I made no such threat. You did, Somersby said, his words hardening. You told me that if Rosalind was seen with Lord Hartwell, you would tell Lord Pemberton that she had invited him. You said she would be the adulteress, not the victim, and you said I would be the cuckold. Lady Alderton's face went pale. That was not a threat. It was a warning. It was a threat, Somersby said. And it made me wonder why you would threaten me unless there was something you needed me not to find. So I asked my solicitor to investigate further. And he found this. He withdrew a second document from the drawer and placed it on the desk. Lady Alderton stared at it, her fingers quivering, and Somersby saw the moment she recognized it. "This is a financial settlement," Somersby said quietly. "It shows that you received £400 when Lord Hartwell married Lady Catherine Holt. My solicitor also found correspondence between you and Mr. Holt, indicating that you brokered the match. And he found a second settlement, dated 6 months after my betrothal to Rosalind was formalized. This settlement shows that you received an additional £200 from my mother's estate as compensation for arranging the match." Lady Alderton's composure shattered. "Your mother agreed to the payment. It was a customary arrangement." "Perhaps," Somersby said. "But what is not customary is lying to a man about why he was refused by the woman he loved, and then profiting from his subsequent marriage. What is not customary is arranging a match for your stepdaughter without informing her, or me, that you had been paid to do so. You sold her twice, Lady Alderton. Once to the Holt family, and once to me." Lady Alderton straightened, her voice rising. "I secured Rosalind's future. I ensured that she would be provided for. Everything I did for her benefit." He shook his head. "No. Everything you did for yourself." He stood, and Lady Alderton took a step back, her hands gripping the back of the chair for support. "I will not be party to this deception any longer," Somersby said. "I will be writing to my solicitor tomorrow morning, and I will be instructing him to begin annulment proceedings. I will not remain married to a woman who was purchased for me." Lady Alderton's voice was sharp with desperation. "If your wife is seen with Lord Hartwell, I will tell Lord Pemberton she invited him. She will be the adulteress, not the victim. And you, Lord Somersby, will be the cuckold." Somersby stared at her, his expression cold. "You have already made that threat, Lady Alderton, and it has already failed? I suggest you leave Briarfield before I decide to make these documents public." Lady Alderton's hands shook as she turned and left the study, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Somersby stood alone, staring at the documents on his desk, and for the first time since his wedding, he felt the weight of the deception lift from his shoulders. Rosalind sat at the kitchen table late that night, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. The house was silent. The staff long since retired, and she had come down to the kitchen because she could not bear to remain in her room any longer. She was afraid. Afraid of what Thomas Somersby would do. Afraid of what would happen when the truth became public, afraid of the choice she would be forced to make. The door opened, and she looked up to see Edward standing in the doorway. He wore no coat, his shirt open at the collar, and his hair was disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. He crossed the room and sat down in the chair opposite her, his movements slow and deliberate, and he reached across the table and placed his hand palm up on the scarred wood between them. There was an offer, not a claim, an invitation, not a demand. Rosalind stared at his hand for a long moment, her breath catching in her throat. And then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. And they sat like that in the dim light of the kitchen, neither of them speaking, until the candle on the table burned down to a stub and guttered out. The next morning, Rosalind stood in the corridor outside Lady Alderton's room, her jaw set. She had just left a confrontation with her stepmother, a confrontation in which she had spoken the words she had been holding back for 10 years. She had told Lady Alderton that everything she had lost, her stepmother had arranged. She had told her that the lie had stolen a decade and that no amount of security or position could replace what had been taken. Lady Alderton had not apologized. She had stood in her room, her expression cold and unyielding, and she had said, "You think truth will protect you? You are a baronet's daughter married to a baron. Without me, you would have been a governess. Everything you have, I arranged." And Rosalind had answered, her voice steady and clear, "Everything I lost, you arranged too." She had walked out of the room, leaving her stepmother standing alone, and now she stood in the corridor, her chest heaving, her pulse racing. Edward was waiting at the end of the corridor, his expression tense, and when she saw him, something inside her broke. She crossed the distance between them, her footsteps quick and unsteady, and when she reached him, she took the front of his coat in both hands and pulled him down to her. His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm against her cheek. And she whispered, "I should have come back." He answered quietly, "Yes, I am here now." "That is not the same thing." His voice was barely audible. "I know." She kissed him. His hands stayed at his sides until she pulled them to her waist, and then his fingers tightened, his grip firm and sure, and the kiss deepened. It was not gentle. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman deciding what she wanted, not receiving what he offered. And when she finally pulled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps, she saw the question in his eyes. "I do not know what happens next," she said, "but I know I cannot live the rest of my life pretending I do not love you." Edward's hands tightened on her waist. "Then we will find a way," he said. "Whatever it takes, Rosalind, we will find a way." Lady Alderton's drawing room was the same room where she had told Edward, "She doesn't want you," 10 years ago. The walls were papered in pale green silk, the furniture upholstered in cream damask, and the writing desk by the window was the same desk where she had kept the letter that had destroyed a decade. It was night now, the room lit by candles, and 4 people stood within it: Rosalind, Edward, Lady Alderton, and Lord Somersby. Somersby spoke first. He crossed the room and placed a folded document on Lady Alderton's writing desk, his movements deliberate and precise. "This is a financial settlement," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It shows that you were paid £400 when Lord Hartwell married Lady Catherine Holt. My solicitor traced the payment back to Catherine's family, and he found correspondence between you and Mr. Holt, indicating that you brokered the match." Lady Alderton's expression did not change, but her hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "That arrangement was perfectly legal," she said. "I facilitated a match that benefited both families." "And this?" Somersby continued, placing a second document on the desk, "is a record of the payment you received from my mother's estate when my betrothal to Rosalind was formalized. £200, paid 6 months after you received confirmation that Lord Hartwell was no longer available." Lady Alderton's composure flickered, and she rose from her chair, on her voice sharp. "Your mother agreed to that payment. It was a customary arrangement for facilitating a suitable match." "Perhaps," Somersby said. "But what is not customary is lying to a man about why he was refused by the woman he loved, and then profiting from his subsequent marriage. What is not customary is arranging a match for your stepdaughter without informing her or me that you had been paid to do so. You sold her twice, Lady Alderton, once to the Holt family and once to me." Lady Alderton's voice rose, her control slipping. "I secured her future. I ensured that she would be provided for. Everything I did for her benefit." Rosalind stepped forward. "No, you sold my future, and you told me he chose to leave." She turned to Edward, and her voice softened. "And you believed her. You did not come to my window. You did not write. You did not ask my father. You read a letter and you left. Edward's mouth tightened. No, I did not. I have no excuse. I have no... Rosalind, I failed you, and that failure is mine to carry. Rosalind turned back to her stepmother, and her tone grew cold. I am going to say this in the room where you said it to him. He wanted me. I wanted him. You knew both things, and you lied. Lady Alderton's hands shook, her composure cracking. You are being dramatic, she said, her voice rising. You are married, Rosalind. You spoke vows before God. No amount of truth will dissolve that. Somersby spoke quietly. No, but I will. The room fell silent and all eyes turned to him. Somersby's expression was calm, his posture composed, and he spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had made his decision and would not be swayed. I will not remain married to a woman who was a transaction, he said. My solicitor will begin annulment proceedings tomorrow morning. I will testify that the marriage was arranged under false pretenses, and that I was not informed of the full circumstances surrounding the betrothal. The annulment will be granted. Lady Alderton stared at him, her face pale. You cannot do this, she said. You will be humiliated. Your family will... My family will understand, Somersby said. And my honor will remain intact. I will not keep a wife who was purchased for me. He turned to Rosalind, and his expression softened. You deserve better than this, he said. You deserve a choice, and I will not stand in the way of that. He walked to the door, opened it, and left the room without looking back. The door closed behind him, and the three remaining figures stood in silence. Lady Alderton sank into her chair, her body trembling, and Edward moved to stand beside Rosalind, his hand finding hers. This is not finished, Lady Alderton said, her voice low and bitter. You think you have one, but you have not. Society will do what it always does, Rosalind said quietly. It will talk, and then it will move on. But you, Lady Alderton, will not move on. You will remain here, in this house, in this room, with the knowledge of what you have done. And that, I think, is a punishment worse than anything I could inflict. She turned and walked out of the drawing room, Edward following close behind, and Lady Alderton was left alone in the room where she had told the lie that had destroyed 10 years. The settlement documents lay on her desk, the candles flickered in their sconces, and the silence pressed in around her like a shroud. Spring arrived at Briarfield with the scent of rain and new grass. The morning room, which had once been Lady Alderton's domain, was now Rosalind's. Lady Alderton had been removed to rented rooms in Bath, her belongings packed and sent after her, and the house had settled into a quieter, gentler rhythm. The annulment had been granted, the proceedings conducted with discretion, and Thomas Somersby had left Briarfield with his dignity intact and his honor unquestioned. Rosalind stood at the Briarfield garden gate one morning in early April, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadow beyond. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand, the letter she had written to Mr. Gresham 10 years ago, the letter that had been used to destroy a decade. Edward's solicitor had found it among Lady Alderton's papers, and he had returned it to Rosalind with a note explaining its significance. She looked at the letter for a long moment, reading the careful, youthful handwriting, and then she tore it in half. The pieces fluttered from her fingers, caught by the wind, and she watched as they were carried away across the meadow, disappearing into the tall grass. That letter was never mine to refuse, she said quietly, and never yours to believe. Edward stood beside her, his hand resting on the iron bar of the gate, and he nodded. No, he said. It was not. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Rosalind turned and walked back toward the house, her steps light and unhurried. Edward followed, When they reached the morning room, he found her sitting at the table, a book open before her and a letter in her hand. "What is that?" he asked, crossing the room to sit beside her. "A letter from Thomas Somersby," Rosalind said, her voice warm. "He has remarried. A woman named Miss Hartley from Kent. He says they are very happy, and he has sent me a book of botanical illustrations that I once admired." She placed the letter on the table and opened the book, her fingers tracing the delicate drawings of flowers and leaves. Edward watched her, and he saw the way her expression softened, the way the tension that had gripped her for so long had finally eased. "You are smiling," he said. She glanced up. "Thomas Somersby is happy. That matters to me." "You are generous with a man you did not choose," Edward observed. "I am generous with a man who chose to let me go when keeping me would have been easier," Rosalind said. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "He gave me a choice, Edward. He did not have to do that. He could have kept me bound to him and no one would have questioned it. But he did not. He let me go." Edward reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers closing around hers. "And what did you choose?" he asked quietly. Rosalind smiled, her grip tightening on his. "I chose you," she said. "I chose the life we should have had 10 years ago. I chose the man who came back, even if he came back late." Edward lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I will not let go again," he said. She nodded. "I know." She turned back to the book, her free hand turning the page. And Edward sat beside her, his hand still holding hers on the table. The gesture was unhurried, permanent, the touch of a man who had learned the cost of leaving and would not make that mistake again. Outside the window, the spring sun broke through the clouds, and the Briarfield garden bloomed with new life.